All right, and we are back for part one talking about early Greece. And we're going to go ahead and start by talking about the earliest civilization kind of in the area, and it was known as the Minoan civilization. They lived on the island of Crete. They were, as far as we know, they were a powerful seafaring people. They were very capable of sailing in the Mediterranean. They dominated trade in the Eastern Mediterranean, having connections with places like Egypt and the Holy Lands, and also Greece. The main time frame that they were actually most noted for was around 2000 BC to about 1400 BC. And then they kind of mysteriously disappeared. We don't really know exactly why, which I'll get to in a moment. But they actually started much, much, much earlier than 2000 BC. There's actually early evidence on the island of Crete in the city of Knossos, where it actually dates back all the way to about 7000 BC. Start seeing the first remnants of some type of a civilization that was there, although they really didn't have a kind of a major city until much, much later on, until around 2000 BC. But there were certainly people on the island for quite a while. So again, as I mentioned, they lived on the island of Crete, which is a large island in the southern edge of the Aegean Sea, and they were big traders. So they had to trade in order to get a lot of the necessities that they needed. So they traded pottery, swords, figurines, vessels of precious metals, and so many other things over quite a large area all around the Mediterranean. They also traded their art and culture. Not really necessarily. I mean, the art, yes, that's a physical object that you can take and you can trade. But their culture, generally, when we travel to certain areas, people kind of pick up on your culture, right? Some of your beliefs, you might be talking to someone and kind of share your ideas. Whatever it might be, their culture kind of spreads where they are trading. In addition to that, their architecture can also spread different ideas of how things should be built, their burial customs, their religious rituals, so many different things that are actually part of their culture kind of spread with that trade. And because of this, since Greece was so close to Crete, you had the Minoan culture having a heavy influence on Greece itself. All right, so here we have the map, and as you can see, we have mainland Greece, where we have Athens and Sparta. Over on the opposite side of the Aegean Sea, on the eastern side, we have Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, or what they say Asia Minor here, and the city of Troy. It's actually listed on this map. And then down at the bottom, we have where it says Knossos and the island of Crete. And because they were so close, they had the ability to trade with Greece, and so therefore they had a heavy influence on a lot of the culture that got built into these other civilizations near them. The Minoan civilization, again, I've talked a little bit about the archaeology at Knossos, and it stretches all the way back to about 7,000 years BC. But in addition to that, they've unearthed a lot of interesting details about the civilization, and they have found that they were quite advanced, and they were very much a thriving culture. So according to archaeologists, they actually named the civilization Minoa after King Minos. So according to legend, Minos was a king that owned a half-human, half-bull monster called the Minotaur, and he kept this monster locked inside of a labyrinth. The labyrinth was built by a demigod in Greek mythology, and it was so complicated that nobody could ever escape once they entered. So it turns out, though, there was one person who ended up escaping from the labyrinth. And intentionally, what had happened is that King Minos's daughter had fallen in love with Prince, I guess, of Greece, who's the Prince of Athens, and she went to the demigod that had created the maze and asked him for a favor, and that favor was to help him go in and kill the Minotaur and then allow him to come back out. And he handed her a ball of string. So as he walked in, he unrolled the ball of string so that way he could follow his string back to the exit. So once he had entered, he found the Minotaur, he slayed the Minotaur, and then followed the string back with the princess waiting for him. They left to go back to Greece, and in the process, he ended up dropping her off on an island, and because of kind of a deal with another god or goddess, Theseus ended up dropping her off on an island on the way back, and he ended up, as he entered back into Athens, his father had told him before he left, hey, if you're alive, put a white sail up on your ship so that way I know that you came back alive. If not, if you are dead, then the people that are sailing the ship back will put up a black sail. And on the way back, they forgot to change out the sail. The sail was still black just as when they had left. And his father had seen the ship coming in and felt so horrible that his son had died that he threw himself off of a cliff into the sea. Thus the reason they actually call the sea the Aegean Sea after Theseus's father, King Aegeus. This is kind of a tragic story to Theseus, but eventually he goes on to become king of Athens. So a very kind of interesting little mythology that goes along with kind of the island of Crete and the Minoan civilization, and kind of shows their culture kind of bleeding into the Greek mythology and the Greek culture later on. So the Minoan civilization finally ends at about around 1200 BC. The reasons for its end are unclear. We're not 100% sure. We have found, that it kind of looks like there was some kind of destruction. So was it a natural disaster? Was there some kind of overpopulation problem with a famine? And the government collapsed? Was there, an invasion, which is very possible? And so we have no idea. It's kind of hard to tell. But about 1450 BC, we do start seeing records of fire damage and destruction, so we can tell that there was something going on at that time. But still, they continued to live in Knossos for an additional 250 years or so before the Minoan civilization actually finally collapsed. No matter what, even though the Minoan civilization collapses, their spread of culture was tremendous, and a lot of their mythology kind of continued on in other areas. And people still kind of, they continued to live on the island of Crete ever since. So their rule as a major sea power and cultural force was over, definitely by 1200 BC. Moving into mainland Greece now, so off the island of Crete, we've talked about that. Moving into the mainland Greece, we start to see, again, a little bit before 2000 BC, but we start to see people settling on the mainland in Greece, and later creating a city known as Mycenae, and you can see that here on the map, on a peninsula here known as Peloponnesus. Mycenae was heavily fortified. It was found on a steep rocky ridge and surrounded by a protective wall of more than 20 feet. So there must have been a reason for them to build a wall so large. They must have been used to invasions. It was definitely there for protection. But nonetheless, we know that there was a lot of trade going on with other civilizations, such as the Minoans, and other seafaring peoples around the Mediterranean. Strong rulers controlled the areas around the Mycenaean cities, such as Tiryns and Athens. So Tiryns is just next to Mycenae, and Athens is across this little isthmus, or kind of land bridge. Just over here, we have the city of Athens, although it's not marked on this map. All right, and sometime after about 1500 BC, through either trade or war, the Mycenaeans came into contact with the Minoan civilization. So there is this overlap of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. So the Mycenaean traders they sailed throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. They were also very good sailors, just like the Minoan civilization, making stops at many different Aegean islands, coastal towns of Anatolia, such as Troy, and ports in Syria, in Egypt, in Italy, all around the Eastern Mediterranean. And once again, we see, because of that trade, because not only the Minoans are very good traders, but since the Mycenaeans are also quite skilled at trading and traveling long distances, we have this Minoan influence culture in this Mycenaean civilization. All right. And the mixture of the Mycenaeans and the Minoans are going to form the core of the Greek religious practice, of the Greek arts, of the Greek politics, and Greek literature. So you get all of this new culture that starts to combine together to create what we understand as classical Greece. This leads us into the Trojan War. So sometimes in the 1200s BC, we see evidence of a conflict at Troy. According to archaeologists that have dealt with working on those sites, there has been evidence of a war that had occurred at Troy. So although it is very, very ingrained into Greek mythology, there's a very high chance that the stories that come through about the Battle of Troy really kind of comes from something that possibly could have occurred. So the Mycenaeans fought a 10-year war against Troy. So we're kind of getting into the story now. The Mycenaeans fought a 10-year war against Troy, which is an independent city located in Anatolia. So if I scroll back here real fast, you'll see here. So here's Mycenae, and they had to cross the Aegean Sea all the way over into Anatolia, which you see over here, to get to Troy. So according to this legend, right, we have a Greek army that had besieged and destroyed Troy because the Trojan prince Paris had kidnapped Helen. She was the beautiful wife of the Greek king, and she also happened to be the daughter of Zeus. Now, the Trojan prince Paris had actually been kind of tricked into kidnapping Helen. He had seen her and fell in love with her. One of the goddesses in Greek mythology, Aphrodite, had given Paris her belt, and this belt had a very special power, and it would make people irresistible to you. So he would show up at Helen's doorstep, she would fall madly in love with him, and he took her back to Troy. The Greek king obviously didn't care for this situation and decided to go after Troy for this reason. So the Greek warrior Achilles and his enemy prince Hector of Troy, during the battle, they both die in combat. Eventually, the Greeks left and presented a large wooden horse as a gift just outside their gates. The Greeks turn around and leave, and the Trojans were like, okay, well, I suppose we'll accept this gift, and they brought it inside of their walls. And at nightfall, what happens is you have kind of the Navy SEALs of the Greek culture, right? They're actually sitting inside this horse. And when night falls, Odysseus, who is the kind of leader of this special forces group, this Greek special forces group, and his men jump out of the horse and they begin sacking Troy, eventually taking it over, and Troy was destroyed. So once again, I had mentioned about Troy. Archaeologists, historians, right? They've looked into this for so long, and they've actually found sites right in the area where many Greek historians had kind of talked about, and they believe that they had found the city of Troy. So they started questioning, okay, well, is this possible that something from Greek mythology itself, from these early stories, could it have actually happened? And there is actually, this large city that they have found. They have found charred remains. They have found destroyed buildings. So there is certainly some type of war that had occurred at this site. And it kind of fits everything that these stories had produced. So it's kind of interesting to see a kind of a Greek mythology begin to come to life. All right, Mycenaean collapse and the Dorian Age. So not long after the Trojan War, the Mycenaean civilization begins to collapse. Around 1200 BC, sea raiders attacked and burned many Mycenaean cities. And so around the same time as the Minoans, we had the collapse of the Minoan civilization, definitely around by 1200 BC. So around the same time, we see both the Minoan civilization and the Mycenaean civilizations begin to collapse, with their cultures kind of sticking around in the area. The Dorians kind of move into this war-torn countryside and begin to take over. And during this time, Greeks appear to have temporarily lost the art of writing. We have this 400-year period between 1150 and 750 BC where there's really no record of what had happened, except for some stories that eventually followed. One of the other things I wanted to talk about was the Iliad and the Odyssey. There was a great blind storyteller, and later on it was written down. But Homer was this kind of great storyteller, and he used to tell these epic poems of great battles and other Greek feats. So lacking writing during the Dorian period, which he kind of was near the end of the Dorian period there, the Greeks had learned about their history through stories. So according to these traditions, now we don't know a whole lot about this guy, but he's definitely believed to have composed his epics in his poems, celebrating these heroic deeds sometime between 750 and 700 BC. Now, the Trojan War was one of them. All right, so the Trojan War actually forms the backdrop for one of his epic poems, the Iliad. And then what happens is, they talk about Achilles and his battle to the death with the Prince Hector. And then you have his second book, which is the Odyssey. And the Odyssey actually takes place after the Battle of Troy is finally over. Yeah, Odysseus, who is this guy that was kind of the leader of that secret night operation that was in the Trojan horse. So after his group kind of ransacks Troy and destroys it, they pack up their things and head back to Greece. And what happens is during the Odyssey is it takes place, it talks about that trip back for Odysseus, and which was a very, very long, drawn-out trip back. So the last thing I want to talk about are the Greek myths. The Greek myths actually developed a rich set of myths, or these traditional stories, about their gods. And it's very interesting because through these myths actually help the Greeks understand the mysteries, right, that they couldn't explain, the mysteries of nature and the mysteries of human passions. So what they did is to help them understand these things, they started attributing gods to human qualities such as love and hate and jealousy. And in these stories, it's very, very kind of intricate and detailed. But these gods, quarreled with each other and competed with each other constantly. And it kind of they try and explain certain morals of the stories to kind of teach their kids. One thing that kind of separated gods from men was that these gods lived forever. And some of the main ones, which I know you've probably heard of, especially the first one here, is Zeus. So Zeus is the ruler of the gods. He lives on Mount Olympus, and he lives with his wife Hera. Zeus was not a very loyal husband. All right, so he ends up bearing many, many children in Greek mythology, and always kind of going behind Hera's back. And Hera was not the friendliest person, and you would not want to anger her in any way, because she was actually the goddess of women. She looked over women. She was a goddess of marriage, and she was often jealous of Zeus's relationships with other women. So eventually she would take revenge on, many of Zeus's children. So one of Zeus's children was Athena. Athena was known as the goddess, that should say goddess, of wisdom. She was Zeus's daughter, and overall his favorite child, eventually earning a place on Mount Olympus with the other major gods. So the Greeks had actually thought of Athena as the guardian of cities, and in turn named their main city after her, Athens. All right, so to end it off, I did put up a list here of the Greek gods, and some of these we might take a look at in some other assignments. So the ones in red here are actually the gods that had earned a place on Mount Olympus. The gray ones down here are some additional ones, which have just some interesting stories, but did not earn a place on Mount Olympus. And then we also have kind of these other purplish ones besides Kronos over here, which are Titans, right? So we have Atlas, Epimetheus, Prometheus, and not really a Titan, but more of a monster, right? The Cyclops. And there were many of those.